If you're anything like me, collecting art supplies and trying out new materials is half the fun of being an artist. I'm not sure if I should be embarrassed or proud, but over the years, I've collected so many materials that I have over 70 unique pink drawing tools. And in this video, I'm going to try to use as many pink materials as I can to create a beautiful piece of art. I'm going to get started by taking a quick inventory of what I've got to work with and doing some swatching, and then I'll dive into ideation and planning before I create the final piece. Along the way, I'll be revealing every supply that I use, including the supply that saved this drawing, and my top tips for effectively using a variety of different media together. So far, I've mixed my liquid watercolors and my inks, and now I'm swatching my gouache. I have introduced white here so that I can work with a variety of tints. Here I'm swatching my Derwent Inktense blocks. These allow you to draw really expressively, and then you can add water so that you can get a really nice painterly effect. I also have Neocolor 2 artist crayons. These are waxier and more opaque, but they serve a very similar purpose to the Derwent blocks. I just like to have a lot of different materials, so I have all of them. I've also swatched my markers, and I decided to pull out all of the materials that I've used so far that were too red or too violet. I really want this project to be all pink. I was also able to find a few pink watercolor markers, paint pens, and multi-liners. Here I'm adding water to my Caran d'Ache Museum aquarelles and my Derwent Inktense pencils. No surprises here, but I had a ton of colored pencils. I am using a combination of luminance, polychromos, Holbein, Lightfast, ChromaFlow, and a few others that I had lying around. It took a lot longer than I expected to decide what I was going to draw with all of these pink materials. I wanted to find a photo reference that would allow me to play with a variety of textures and would really encourage me to layer and explore lots of different materials. And I also dove into the psychology around pink. Yes, pink is often associated with Valentine's Day and love and romance, but to me, it also is a symbol of fun. I think of the song Girls Just Want to Have Fun, this really lighthearted, playful day, and I found this photo reference of a day at the lake, and I thought this is going to be the one. So I dove into thumbnailing, I played around with the composition, and keep in mind, my photo reference has zero pink whatsoever, which I kind of loved. This allows me to be really playful and expressive with the pink colors that I use, and at this point, I realized I really needed to take the time to label the colors that I was going to lean into the most. I kind of wish I had done this with my swatching at the beginning. So learn from my mistakes, label when you swatch so that you remember which colors are what. Starting with a thumbnail composition is key, especially when you're not going to be holding on to the photo reference super tightly. That gives me a map of where I'm going, and it allows me to plan out my journey and how I'm going to use all of these different materials. I start with my water-based materials because these are going to be more compatible underneath some of my other materials. And I start with magenta ink and a couple drops of violet ink. This allows me to cool down that really bright magenta, and I'm definitely leaning into playing with temperature throughout the composition of this piece so that I can make certain parts of the drawing recede into space and other parts of the drawing come forward. This is also sort of like an underpainting, so I'm paying attention to value and where I want the darkest and the lightest parts of the composition to be. As I move forward, I've switched over to using pure magenta watercolor. This allows me to bring a lot of attention and emphasis to that inner tube in the front of the painting, but I'm still working with just water-based materials, and this is very compatible with the ink that I used earlier. In fact, I'm just painting it right over the top, and then I'm mixing them together. After this is completely dry, I switch over to my water-soluble pencils. These are the Inktense pencils, and they allow me to add a little bit of texture and have a little bit more control while I'm building up the painting. And now that I know where everything is, I'm ready to knock out the sky in a little bit more opacity. I did pull my blue paint out for this, and I added just a drop of blue gouache to my magenta gouache so that I was able to cool it down a little bit and really manipulate and play with the temperature in this piece. Like watercolor, markers also need to go down towards the beginning before you have a lot of texture on your page. Once the mountains were completed, I came in with my pan pastels using the darker pinks as shadows on the bottom part of the clouds and the lighter tints on the top part of the clouds. I used a variety of different sponges and blending techniques pinks to create a really soft, feathery cloud. And I wasn't able to do this completely with just the sponges, so I came in with a little bit of white gouache to add some emphasis along the edges of the clouds so that there was some contrast between the brightest whites and those softer shadows. I also mixed some of my pink into that gouache so that it was still more on the pink side and would feather in and transition into those darker areas. And then as I built up in layers, I also came in with water-soluble colored pencils in a variety of different colors. I'm making sure that those clouds towards the bottom, closest to the mountains, recede into the distance, so I don't use as much light value color there. After the background is complete and I can kind of start seeing that sense of depth, I can begin to come in and start working on the foreground. This boy in the inner tube is the focal point, and I want the majority of the emphasis to be here. So I don't want to necessarily leave it all the way to the end, but I do want to work from general shapes to specific. And as each layer progresses, I'm going to get more and more detailed with this area in the front, but I'm going to build it up with the background so that the whole drawing or painting, I'm using a lot of different materials here, but I want everything to kind of come up together. The markers that I'm using throughout this piece are the Bionio markers. These are a really inexpensive set that you can find on Amazon. They have a ton of different colors and they're about 40 cents a piece, but you buy them in a large set. I think a large set of markers can be such a great asset for any artist because they are a very fast moving medium that allow you to experiment with ideas really quickly, and they work in combination with tons of materials. I'll link these markers and a couple other fun sets down in the notes below. When I move into working on the water, I want the water to be a little bit cooler. It's reflecting the sky, which is also cool in temperature. Here I'm using the Derwent paint pans in the pastel shades. I found a pink and a purple that combined beautifully in that set, and I used them quite a bit throughout the entire drawing. I'm back at the clouds. They weren't quite what I wanted them to be yet, so I came in and added a little bit more texture. I popped back and forth into the sky throughout the entire drawing, and especially while I'm waiting for things to dry. Now that the water's dry, I can come in and refine in that area a little bit more, and I'm using warmer colors now, especially around the inner tube, because I want there to be a transition from cool to warm as I move to that point of focus. I'm using tons of different colors in the water. Part of that is so that I can use all of the materials that I pulled out, but another part of that is to add depth and variety and to keep working on the texture. This light fast color pencil is amazing. It was such a deep dark color, and those deep dark pinks were few and far between. So I definitely use that to emphasize the rugged texture of this mountain in the foreground, but I didn't add any texture to those mountains in the background because those are receding, they're far away, and I want to de-emphasize those. I spent a lot of time on this second pass through of the boy in the inner tube. I really am working on details here, so I'm slowing down. I'm looking really closely, and of course, the best tool for that is going to be colored pencils. So I'm not using water-soluble colored pencils or markers or anything that is a little bit more expressive and quick. I'm slowing down with the traditional color pencils. Every single color pencil that I used worked so beautifully over the top of the marker. This is such a fantastic combination. Marker first, lay out the base layers, get it in quick, and then add and refine details with the colored pencils over the top. I love this Luminance white colored pencil. It is so fantastic at laying opaque whites over the top of those marker base layers because I definitely did not get these stripes on the inner tube perfect the first time. And when you're comfortable with your materials and you know how they're going to layer and how flexible you can be with them, you can take some liberties and not worry about being perfect at the very beginning because you can say, oh, I can fix that with colored pencils later. It doesn't have to be perfect. Or maybe it wasn't even important for it to be perfect to begin with. I'm also looking really closely at contrast while I'm working on the inner tube. I want the whites to pop and I want the darks to be darker than anywhere else in the composition because the viewer is going to look at those areas of highest contrast more than anything else. When you have material over the entire surface, it's easy to say, okay, I think I'm done. But this is exactly when you should step back, ask for some feedback, and start being really critical about what you have on the page. It was at this point that I decided I needed to make some big changes, particularly to these mountains in the background. I wanted there to be a softer transition between the furthest away mountains and the mountains in the foreground. And I also wanted these mountains that have the rockier texture to be a little bit more subdued. They are still far away from the tube. So I made some big shifts, mostly working with colored pencil so that I could manipulate the depth of this piece. I also came in with bright whites in the foreground to bring some more emphasis here. Okay, now I've got to show you the coolest supply ever. This is the Art Primo Hit and Go marker. You can fill this up with any ink that you want, and what I love about it is you can mix your own color. I was introduced to this product and many other products in this video through Sketchbox, which is an art subscription service, and I have been lucky enough to make their educational content over the last year. When you sign up for a subscription art service, you get a variety of materials sent right to your door, and you get the opportunity to experiment with supplies that you might never have otherwise. That's also how I found this brush pen, and this was the supply that saved this painting. I needed a little extra sparkle, and at this point my colored pencils weren't sticking very well and they only went so white. But this Faber-Castell Pitt Artist brush pen was opaque. It stuck to everything that I put it on. I've used this over pastels, watercolor, colored pencils, you name it, and the brush pen allowed it to be applied in a really expressive way, which I think really complemented the water in the foreground and made this even more of the focal point. Understanding how to get a variety of different supplies that are all the same color to work together is such a big win, and I know that you are going to have so much fun experimenting with these techniques. But you won't be able to get the full impact out of a one color challenge like this until you understand color theory. So be sure to watch this video next, where I break down the 4-step journey to mastering color theory. See you there.